We have a lot of horsepower in this room around sales operations and planning. So we'll make it very interactive. Feel free to ask questions as it relates to sales ops. The focus here is how do we make sales ops turn it into a growth engine. And so with that, I'll just go around and introduce the folks on the panel here and their background. So that'll be helpful. So Jim, you want to start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jim Schwappach. I'm currently the head of sales operations at a startup up in San Francisco called Copper. I've been there for about a year in a lot of very high growth situations, so a lot of experience about kind of getting out of the churn that you normally experience and the chaos of a selling team and trying to get into something more structured over the course of the year. Prior to Copper, I was at Salesforce in a variety of operations and strategy roles for about 8 years, and then spent time down in Silicon Valley running a product line at a capital equipment manufacturing company. So, nice to meet you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Kelly. I am over operations for Talkdesk, which is a Bay Area-based call center company. We sell software globally, though. Rapidly growing, I was brought in about 6 months ago to help them scale, because definitely recognize the value of operations and building a scalable growth organization. Prior to that, I worked for a company called InContact, also through that really steep growth curve. And it was a lot of fun building out the infrastructure there to make sure that we were able to scale. And in fact, I worked with RingCentral quite a bit during that transition as well. So, there you go. Oh, you've got one.
Hi, everyone. Ryan Toben. I am at Gainsight, and I lead our sales organization around Gainsight PX, which is our new product analytics and engagement tool. Prior to leading the sales portion, I came to Gainsight to run revenue operations, so sales ops, marketing ops, in the various functions under that. Prior to that, I had sales ops and strategy at Mixpanel, and then led sales ops at SuccessFactors, which is where I sort of came up in terms of sales ops experience.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Celie Laidlaw. I currently work at Valor Equity Partners. I'm on the operations team there, so we work with our portfolio companies actually implementing go-to-market processes and systems. Prior to that, I ran field operations at Radius Intelligence, which is a B2B data company. I did my MBA at Harvard, and then prior to that, I was at about 5 years in sales strategy at Salesforce. So happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. So as you think about growth, one of the first things that comes to mind is how do you define sales operation? Lisa, you've been around in different roles. You have ops right now in general. So when you think about sales ops, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Like, this is what sales ops should be doing for a growth-focused company.
Well, I view sales operations as the execution arm for the strategy. So they should be a strategic advisor to for the go-to-market, of course, providing the data and the analytics behind the go-to-market strategy. But ultimately, it's the sales operations responsibility to put the systems in place to allow the teams to execute. We have to provide the accountability and the visibility into what's going on the day-to-day basis to ensure that we're actually marching down the right pathway. So I think from that perspective, I view ultimately, sales operations has the responsibility to make sure the trains are running on time and that the plan is actually happening as designed. So, any other one have comments?
I definitely agree. I think it's about making the trains run on time. I also think it's acting as a translator between the board plan, the financial plan, and the actual executional details. So I think a lot of the time that we spend as operations teams is figuring out how do we turn into actual tactics for the sales team, for the enablement team, for the sales development team, how to actually go out and perform to plan, and then see around the corners so that you're making sure that the future planning exercises you're doing will actually have the foundation they need to be successful.
So Ryan and Jim, both of you're running right now in a high growth company, and you've run the sales ops team at Gainsight, growing rapidly, right? Most of the time, like our experience with sales ops, people are running with hair on fire, right? They've got more things to do than time in the day. So how do you manage to achieve that strategic lens that Celia and Lisa have mentioned while keeping the day-to-day execution piece aligned?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that, coming from a very large company, Salesforce, and going to a very small company, Copper, I think one of the things that really struck me, obviously you can make a lot about the differences between those two companies, but the fundamentals are the same. And so, I think focusing on those fundamentals, what are the targets that the sales team is running at? Where are you performing well? Where are you not performing well? And really focusing on, just those baseline fundamentals. One of the challenges that we're facing right now is, this ever-going problem of data quality. And, the solution to that is a fundamental solution. You got to go and you got to focus on data quality. That's the foundation on a lot of what you're doing, a lot of the strategic decisions you're making, those sorts of things. So, as a lot of you can attest, that data quality thing is kind of the problem, the foundational problem that you're trying to focus. And, other things, as Celie mentioned, how do the sales targets align to the board plan? Do you have enough overassigned, those sorts of things? And really just focusing on the fundamentals and trying to push off a lot of the hair on fire kind of stuff that you run into day to day.
So I think that I focus a lot on, and I agree with everything everybody said, but I would go slightly in a different direction as I focus a little bit more on what's actually important versus what the board says is important or what is important on paper. And most of the time in a high growth situation, new bookings are important and figuring out how you're going to do that. So if understanding the funnel is the most important thing right now because leads are coming in but we're not converting them, then I spend a lot of time on that and trying to figure out sort of partnering with sales. And so I think you said looking around the corner, like doing that, what's going to get us over this line. It was when I was at Mixpanel, I think we grew like 3x in about 18 months. And we hired 50 sales reps from 6 up to just shy of 60. So hiring was important. And understanding the increase in lead flow was important. So that's most of what we spent our time on. And frankly, the sales process wasn't very good. And for a long time, we knew it wasn't good. And it was like, we're figuring it out. And so I didn't spend almost any time on it. And then we got to 55, 60 reps. And the sales process was super important because we were dropping the ball everywhere. So now it's like, okay, well, now I'm going to stop working on that. I'm going to focus on this. And I'd like to say that I was trying to get all the trains running and making sure everything's happening. I was really more concerned about making sure we were provisioned and making sure that, we're going to be able to make the quarter than I was the broader picture. And then later on, retention became a big issue because we'd focused all the stuff on sales. And then, so that's when we hired customer ops to come in and start leveraging a tool like Gainsight and other tools to understand what they're doing so there's not a leaky bucket at the bottom of the boat. So I don't know, I guess I focus more on prioritizing and then understanding that some stuff's broke and that'll be fine, you'll fix that later.
So there was a question earlier in the room as well around the investment in sales ops, right? So as you think about growing companies based on your experience, all four of you, how much are you guys investing in sales ops as a percentage of revenue?
I'm probably not a good person to answer that question because we're totally underinvested, which I think is a common problem. One of the things that my company faced is, we had sort of an operations function from the start, and in the previous session, emphasizing the need to bring somebody in that can apply some structure is very important. Because we didn't have that structural foundation built, and so that required us to invest a lot in manual effort. And just manually working around how are you issuing comp plans, how are you recognizing revenue, how are you tracking subscriptions, all of that sort of thing. So, we're underinvested. I took a big note on what the guidance was, so we're definitely going to take that back and see what I can do. But
Adrian's right here.
Well, I can say within Talkdesk currently, it's an area where we are focusing investment for a couple reasons. First, we know that one of the pieces that's really important in a rapidly growing organization is, like you were talking about, the different conversion points. Like if you may have enough pipeline, but if we're not converting it, it doesn't really matter. Enablement is really important. So if I'm putting enablement in the bucket underneath operations, we're making a heavy investment. I would say from the actual core sales operations side, we run really lean and probably will continue to do so until we start to see the bookings growth continue. But on the enablement side, I am a firm believer that you invest early and you invest big, because if you don't have the people to train up and enforce your sales process and your product training and everything there, then everything kind of falls apart. So Talkdesk has made a big investment on the enablement side, and I think we'll continue to see more focus on operations because it's a competitive differentiator if you can have a strong operations team, no question.
Excellent.
So.
I'm not sure, actually, on the 8 to 10%. I think it's interesting. I sent a Slack to the team to see what we were at. I've been accused of having a bloated sales ops team at pretty much every company I've been at, so I'm going to assume that I'm on the higher side of that. I think that I agree. If you put in enablement, if you put in customer operations, if you put in marketing operations, like the different teams, it can fluctuate. And I also think, and I'm sure everybody in this room knows, like generally speaking, you hire a lot of like can-do, smart people who will take on whatever needs to be done. That's sort of the makeup of a sales ops person. And so you hire people and you fill up their day with plenty of stuff to do that's important. So it's also hard to tell, like, do you have too much? Someone says you have too much, and you look at it and you're like, but everybody's working a ton. So I think that's where prioritization comes in more, but I don't know if I have the right answer to that question.
Thinking about it from looking at across our portfolio companies, we actually don't shoot for a specific number. I think that we're looking for specific attributes. So again, enablement I think is key. That's something that a lot of our companies significantly underinvest in. If I think about not only sales enablement around kind of new products and launches and that sort of thing, but really training and onboarding and hiring. I mean, retention is another huge aspect of a cost for the team. And so just thinking through how do we make sure that people are able to get onboarded quickly and up to speed and actually productive. I think that's something that we really look for just as a characteristic of the team. And then other things that we think about are, do they have, not necessarily the most tools, but the right tools in place? So how are we thinking about data cleansing and deduping and just kind of basics like that? But also things like, are there sales enablement types of tools? Do they have the right, MAT to Salesforce or CRM workflow going on? So those are just kind of the under the hood mechanics that we really look for. It's not necessarily a specific target or number.
Okay. Any questions from the room on the topic, because I'll keep going on. I've got a lot of questions for them on growth, but if anybody has any questions on this, feel free to raise your hand as well. So, Ryan, you mentioned, go ahead. You had a question?
So you were talking about data cleansing, and so that's typically a function of Salesforce administration. Where do you see Salesforce admins? Do you see them as a function of sales ops or a different department?
Sure. For those of you guys who couldn't hear the question, so where do we see kind of the Salesforce admin fitting into the overall structure? Is it sales ops or somewhere else? Did I get that right? So my preference is to have Salesforce admins under ops. I think that just the direct line to saying, hey, I need to have this configuration changed. I need to have these fields added. I want to have my opportunity layouts structured in this way because it's easier for my sales team. That's definitely my preference. I've seen it every way that you can have it. So whether it's under IT, whether it's under, like marketing ops and a broader ops org, I do believe, though, that especially for smaller high growth situations, that the ability to be nimble is greatly expedited if you have your Salesforce admin under the sales ops function. If anyone else has a different...
I was going to say, I want to comment on that a little bit because I've seen it both ways, where you have your really high-level programmers sitting under IT, but then you have your admins on sales ops. When you have your primary admin and programmer sitting in sales ops, you've got to be really careful to balance priorities too, because other departments that may not fall under that sales ops heading will have needs. Marketing ops is going to have needs. Your sales development team is going to have needs. And even on the customer side, you've got to have needs. So if it sits underneath a true sales ops where it's just the sales team, you've got to be careful to manage priorities and make sure the relationships are there, and that that you manage the company priorities, not just the sales priorities, because things can break on the customer side that have very detrimental effects throughout the organization. So.
And I agree with that. And I think in the last presentation, this question came up, and I agree with the answer that was given, which was early on, basically sales ops tends to be IT, right? Because Salesforce is the lifeblood of a growing company. So you become and then IT, and then as you grow and the IT department comes up, that's when you start looking at the Salesforce admins and do they move over to IT or not.
So Jim, you've wrestled with a lot of data quality, right? Like, how do you deal with that?
I agree with everything that everybody said, and I think the key, one of the things, again, getting back to the similarities and differences between a large company and a small company. One of the things that surprises me is it's incredibly difficult to maintain these, kind of cross-functional relationships, and that's one of the things I think we've done really well, and I don't think you can underestimate that as how you can overemphasize the need for that. So our CRM admin, who doesn't happen to be a Salesforce admin, is really part and parcel of every organization in the company, whether it be engineering, whether it be marketing, whether it be business operations, whether it be finance, whether it be the executive team. He's kind of on call, and I think one of the challenges there is to. So we've been very successful at that. I think one of the challenges is it's very easy to get into this add a field mentality whenever somebody needs something, and so you got to fight that. Having seen the outcome of add a field at Salesforce, where you have 180 or 100, whatever the limit of custom fields on the account object, you can't get into that situation, and it's really hard to keep the reins back when you're growing and everybody just needs. I need to know who can I market to, who can I reference, who can I show logos to. I need that on the account object so that I can see that. It's like, well, that is one need, but reconciling across those teams, and that's where really this cross-functional collaboration I think is really important.
Just had a follow-up question regarding the data, right? So I am a Salesforce admin, and my feeling about that is I'm in charge of the configuration, in charge of making the systems work, putting rules and validations in. But as far as data is concerned, I feel like I don't own it. Like, I will help clean it, but I'm not analyzing it on a daily basis. I just want to get your feel for it, that my feeling on that side is kind of true to form.
So I'll start on this one, because I think we all agree that if you go to anybody in the sales team, if you go to anybody in the executive team, the data is never good enough, and the data is always somebody else's problem. And I think that gets to the point that was made earlier, that the sales ops function is kind of that. We bring people in and they just want to do the right thing, and we ran into so many problems at Salesforce based on data quality, and it was this battle between sales and between operations and between IT as to, well, this is an IT problem. No, this is an ops problem. This is a sales problem. And that's where I think really the sales ops function can take. So what we're doing at our company is we're employing every means possible to try to do the best that we can to get the highest quality data set that we can, investing in the right tools to do data enrichment, even co-opting, selling business development resources to go out and scrub that database and do some work there as well. And so, this is really one of those things. I don't know that there's ever going to be a solution to that problem. I think somebody just needs to own it, make the justification for the expense needed to do it, and make the results-based argument of what the value is, and then just go and do it.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think data hygiene is the responsibility of every single person within an organization. But what I look at it from a Salesforce administration and a sales operations perspective, I think that there's a responsibility there to identify where the bad data is coming from. So I have a couple, what I call the naughty list reports, right? To where when you have ops that are closing too fast, they're stale in a stage, things like that, there's a bloated value within the field. So I kind of look for the top 10% and the lower 10% in a couple different areas to try and identify that. And then I push it back to my sales leadership to do that, to follow up and say, hey, I'm seeing a lot of bad data coming out of Brandon. Will you please coach him and help him understand why he can't be doing this? But I do think that I have a responsibility to provide the optics to that. So Salesforce admin, no, I wouldn't expect my Salesforce admin to be the person that's sending out those emails, but I would expect them to build in the fields and the reporting to enable me to coach my leaders.
If you're a sales ops professional today, how do you make the case for investing in sales ops? Because that's one of the things that people say, how do I justify an additional investment in sales ops on my team? And secondly is this data issue, right? You said you have to build a business case, right? How would you go about doing that? I mean, my experience has been that's a hard nut to crack, because people say data is bad. It's just like a statement, but nobody ever gets to quantifying what are the business impact of not having good data.
So back at Radius, I was at a B2B data company, and we didn't use our own data very well to start out. And so I think one of the things that we really did is think through how our segmentation would potentially change once we actually had deduped and cleansed the data. Okay. And it was actually a pretty stark difference between how many accounts fell into different segments versus in option A versus option B. So when you see the difference of the impact there, I think it became pretty easy to justify to our COO and our CEO about why we should basically use our own product on ourselves. But then I think more broadly than that, just seeing the challenges that teams are facing, especially the sales team, is they can't find things. One of the things I think a really effective sales ops team can do is help identify the fields that you don't need and just kind of take out some of the clutter, because I think a lot of things get lost along the way. And then on the flip side of that, for the data that you really do need, it's, I think, an investment in dollars, but also an investment in time. So making certain things required and being able to justify why it's needed. And frankly, we forced that with making fields required at certain stages.
And I want to comment on the field cleanup, because that's something that I'm really passionate about. One time at a previous company, I printed out the salesperson's view. I just printed it out page after page after page, and I pinned it to a bulletin board, and it was floor to ceiling. And this is unrealistic. We can't, as salespeople, often have the attention span like that, and they just aren't going to focus on this. They want to just come into the opportunity, make their notes, move on. So I think it's really important that you make it easy, and then when you implement required fields, that you do have a solid justification and they understand the why behind it. Especially we do stage-based requirements to ensure that we have some of the deliverables as part of our sales process. But I think as far as building a business case, there's no question of the negative impact that bad data can have. It can make delayed reactions. It can have deep impacts to decisions that both the sales leadership, the board, the CEO are making. So you have to get ahead of it as quickly as you can to stop that from happening, because a bad decision at the board level can cost a company millions. So.
I would focus on sort of the budgeting portion of the question. I have had success tying it to whatever the metrics are that we're trying to achieve. For example, recently at Gainsight, we want to reduce our deal duration, right? Days in stage, everything, pretty standard stuff. And we have a forecasting tool, we have Salesforce, we have analytics tool, we have lots and lots of data, and none of the RVPs really look at it, right? Or if they look at it, we ask them, to do something. Do you understand why is this in this stage? What's going on here? And then they'll show up for like the pipeline meeting, and they clearly haven't looked at it, and we kind of like banged our head against the walls for a little while, and like, okay, I don't know what else to give you. So finally, I just made the pitch, and I was like, all right, well, rather than expect them to read all of this, interpret it, and then come to a meeting with suggestions on how to go forward, I said, give me another analytics head, and I will make sure that they have biweekly meetings to go through this together. And then when we show up, we can be productive. And by doing that, we're going to reduce our deal duration by 15% or something like that. And so you don't have to hire 2 more heads because we're not going fast enough, because we're going to disqualify at the bottom. And therefore, like this investment in the sales ops head is going to reduce a much costlier investment in a sales rep or multiple sales reps. I've had some success in situations like that when we want to invest. But on the flip side, I have to be really critical when the team is like, I have too much work to do, we need more people, taking a step back and say, okay, what are you actually doing? Is that important? Because I want to make the case for more people, but I'm not making the case for more people unless I can tangibly point to why this company is going to grow faster if we hire this person.
So we talked about a lot about the execution side of the house on sales ops and how we make the trains run and the cadence. Do you see in your organization sales ops getting engaged on the planning side of the house, the go-to-market plan and the sales strategy? And if yes, how do they do that?
I think they should be deeply involved in the go-to-market planning. Every organization that I've been with on an operations side, I have been very heavily involved in the strategic planning, and I think it's important because if the sales leadership or your executive team makes decisions without the data to back it up, it's just philosophical. And that's where I've a situation where I was just handed a number down by finance and said, okay, hit this number. And I was like, well, okay, so let me explain to you what that's going to take so that we could have a conversation about that. Because the sales leader was just like, okay, we're going to go ahead and hit that number, and we're going to do it through efficiency. And I actually had to step him back and say, you need this many heads, the quotas need to be set here, and setting up that full go-to-market plan and going back to the finance team and helping them understand the costs and what's involved with it. So I think sales operations has got to be involved in the go-to-market planning, no question.
I totally agree. I mean, whether or not we were success factors and had a $100 million bookings target, sales ops owned the go-to-market plan, or if we were, right now, we're basically launching a new product at Gainsight with a much, much smaller target, and we own, the sales ops owns the go-to-market plan.
So the reason I asked the question is because a lot of organizations, what we've seen is, you've seen the sales strategy team and a sales operations team, the two separate teams. For sales planning, someone will say. So that's the reason. Like, say, like you played both hats.
Yeah, so I guess my original team actually with Jim was sales strategy, which then morphed into sales strategy and operations, and then operations was purely ops at Radius. I echo what Ryan said. I think ops not only is involved, but you have to lead a lot of the planning process, if not all of the planning process. I think that you are the function that sees across the entire spectrum of the go-to-market teams. But to the question around kind of sales strategy versus operations, if they are different teams, I think they need to be working hand in hand, because you can't really do the planning without the actual operational execution. Like if you have this concept that you're going to have 25 reps, but it doesn't actually add up to the appropriate amount of street quota, and then you actually take into account attainment and close rates and that sort of thing, you're basically executing to a plan that isn't a real plan. So I think that overall, if your teams are separate, someone better be keeping the trains on time, to Lisa's earlier comment, because it's not going to work once you put it in play.
Yeah, just one follow-up there. So when I started at Copper, there was the view that it was, I took a sales operations role. And when I got there, it was, okay, well, here are the reports that we do, and here's what the leadership wants to see. And, if people want dashboards, you need to update these fields, and you need to provide this. And, it was really startling, because there was a comment made that, things are kind of theories and just what people think rather than based on data. And when I started, it was even worse than that. They thought they were making decisions on data, but they weren't familiar with the data model enough to be able to use the right fields. I mean, it was as simple as that. So from an operations perspective, the people that understand the data inside and out and can provide the correct insight, not a insight. I had a sales leader that came to me and said, well, our business in Europe is, this. And he was off by 10 orders of magnitude just because he was looking at the wrong field. And so if you take that into a planning meeting, you're gonna have totally wrong insights. And so, that's where I think that's how you make that transition, is you demonstrate through data what the value is and what the insights are, where the company is going and where it could be going, and the insights that you can provide to really change that. Because I do believe it is critical for people to understand what the data is so that you can make the correct database decisions, not incorrect ones. So, Lisa, you and I chatted about this earlier in your past company, right? Where you said the EVP, sales, said that the fact that they're growing so fast and staying on target is because they over-invested in sales ops early on. And Ryan, you've done really well on the sales ops side across multiple companies. And we all agree that planning and has to be aligned with execution. Still, 2/3 of reps don't make quota, right? I mean, the attainment numbers are really bad and actually dropping down. So what can we recommend as sales ops practitioners who look at both plan to execution, right? For us to get as close to the number as possible, or keeping at least aligned to plan.
Well, I think when you look at how we execute, the secret sauce has been operations and enablement being hand in hand. I mean, I think that's really important. That I just, when you look at the success in that previous life, that was what his belief system was that if I build the systems and the process to where I take that out of the mind of the salespeople, and then I train them on what they need to do, and I make sure that everything is really clear. Everybody has marching orders. Everybody knows what needs to be done on a day-to-day basis. We'll succeed. And so it's removing all the noise from the day-to-day, it's removing everything, and then getting them trained up and marching. So I think that was, when you look at the reason why that was so business crucial, and he still, I mean, I met with him a couple weeks ago, he still believes that a competitive differentiator is operations, no question. The sales team can sell better because of it. So I don't know if that.
I agree with that. I would say something that I would highlight but not claim to be great at, I try to be better at, is helping sales leaders. And I also have a different view of this as an ops leader versus sales leader, slightly different views, is frankly cutting out the bottom probably 30% of the sales organization and being pretty critical about pips and giving people chances but showing them what's going on, because I wish I had an answer for how do you get more people to hit quota. All I can say is that you got to plan correctly and acknowledge that it's hard to tell a CFO that all the numbers indicate that the quotas need to be dropped by 25%, even if we hit our number last year. And the model doesn't work that way. So how do you put a quota together where, like, what percentage do you want to hit? What's more important? Whether or not that you can see your number or hitting your number, and how rich are the accelerators for the people who do get there, so you don't lose that top 25% that really bring in 70% of the business. And then, frankly, all these people under here, you should focus on enablement. Absolutely, 100% agree. But if you focus on enablement and they don't want to take that, particularly a lot of like young reps who, frankly, just jump into sales and they haven't really thought about what they want to do you want to keep them around? Like, that probably not. And so I think that it's a full cycle that you have to partner with the sales leader in order to help with.
I totally agree. I just want to add on this is something that I have a very non-traditional view on. I believe that PIPs for salespeople belong in sales operations. I predefine everything so that I know exactly when an enterprise rep hasn't hit quota in X quarters, he's on a PIP, and then I know that the next quarter, if he doesn't hit it again, then he's gone. So it gives a little bit more accountability, and I create different PIP plans for sales development, commercial, enterprise. Obviously, they have different life cycles and what that looks like. But I firmly believe that, yes, you should work with your sales leadership and HR to make sure that it's defined. But if you present a PIP plan when someone walks through the door, when they're all excited and say, great, you have 9 months to hit these metrics, or you're gone, it's a real easy conversation. It's not a judgment call anymore. It's truly you've cost the company more money than you've brought in. We're going to clear up your schedule. So I really feel strongly that's an important part of go-to-market.
I think I would going in slightly on the PIP thing, which isn't, I guess, the most pleasant of topics, but
that's great. Is it all ops people here?
Yeah, I know. Screw them. No. In the world of more data, right, you can also, with ops, like taking the charge on that, you can have more intelligent conversations on things like PIPs. Like, so we use a tool called People AI, which basically helps with understanding what the data is of your on activities of the reps, because reps I was never able to get people to log activities. So there's various tools now where you can like connect to the Google Calendar, or maybe if you use a dialer or whatever. So I remember we were going through on an enterprise rep with his manager, and she was like, well, I don't know. He did well at his last company. He's a big whale hunter. And basically I showed him, like, look, he has had like 2 meetings in the last 3 weeks. And then she came back to me and she's like, he doesn't like to put it on his calendar. What? You don't like to put it on your calendar? Like, and then you know what happened? A month later, he quit. And I couldn't get her to fire him. But like, I was like pointing. And so the next time I was like, the data is here. We need to move forward, especially for enterprise reps, because you have no idea what they're doing because they're off in the field. And theoretically, they should always be doing something good, but there's always the risk that they're not.
I'm going to add just one thing to the topic, so maybe not on the PIP subject, but on the terms of how you get the most out of your sales reps and like thinking about their productivity. I think all ops people should spend some time, whether it's a day or a week or just a quarter running a sales team or riding along with your sales reps, understand how they work, understand what makes it easier for them to do their jobs, because then I think you can hold them accountable to metrics. But if you're putting things in place that are painful, really frustrating to them or that they just don't understand why you're doing it, you're going to still continue to struggle with actual adherence to the policies that you're putting in place. So I think, walls of shame work, clean your dashboards work. They're very good tools. But if you don't put things in place that actually have the mechanics that a sales rep can do on a repeated basis, I think that you'll struggle.
So, and Celie, to you on that note, now that you are running portfolio operations, right? And you come into companies at different points of time and you see all different scenarios play out. How do you get them to do the change management from an ops perspective, like sitting outside at Info? How do you get them to start thinking the way you do?
I think it really depends on which stage of growth they're in, but all of them are feeling some amount of pain. And we get the benefit of seeing across our companies, we see the same problems over and over again. And so you can kind of reference, say, we saw this at this company and they were a year or two later than you are, so avoid this problem now. And I think that kind of planting the seed of prevention, which is then going to save them a lot of pain later. It goes back to the data question too. Is like if you put a good foundation for data in now, you're going to avoid hours and hours of rework later. I use that example over and over again because I think that ops people, we all know pain. We know kind of getting through the day and understanding how to work through some of the roadblocks that are there. So if you can kind of say, yeah, I've seen this problem before, and I'm going to help you avoid it. That's really the key to kind of having those ears perk up and actually start listening to you. But I think at the end of the day, it's data, it's sales stage processes, it's the CS motion, like how do you do the handoffs? Those are the three key things that we see over and over again. And so if you can kind of drill down into what are they doing right now, what are some of the best practices that are employed, whether it's by companies that you've worked directly with or just knowing industry best practices and kind of staying up to date on that. I think that's really how we try to add a lot of value across all of the companies in our portfolio.
So I'm going to piggyback on a question that Sarah had asked earlier. So I have a Salesforce instance, right? And you have them in kind of companies over there. And at some point, people say, like, should we stick around with this instance or start over again? Like, what do you guys feel about that?
So we're actually juggling with that question right now, and it was a question that I know Bala and I were talking about at Salesforce too, about when is it too early or when is it too late. It's never too early and it's always too late. So my company's been around for just a handful of years, and we have this instance. It's amazing how clouded and nasty it can get in such a short period of time. And for the first couple, I'd say 4 to 6 months that I was at the company, it was just beating my head against it. We're going to do a data warehouse and that's going to fix it. And we implemented a data warehouse, but the data warehouse is only as good as the foundation on which it's drawing. And so even at this early stage, we finally had made the decision to invest in, okay, we're just going to redo everything, starting from our marketing automation and demand gen to our activity management, to our sales development, to our CRM. And it's a significant investment that was obviously it was a board level decision, but again, kind of going through, at the time is like, hey, look, half of our revenue is coming from the no data segment of our market. And, people don't like seeing that. It's like, well, where is it? Is that the small stuff? Is that the big stuff? And it's like, yeah, it's both, but we don't know how much. So I don't think it's, and getting to the point at Salesforce where we were talking about this, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, it was obviously too late because of all of the hooks and all of the integrations and all of the business process that you'd built through the decades of the company being around, that it's almost impossible to turn around. So, kind of getting back to that idea of foundational things, you got to have a system that you can trust, and it's got to be built scalable, and it's easy to underestimate how hard it is to do that even at an early stage.
So did you, when you say redo, right, do you start from defining the process and the policies, or you first redo as you jump into the tool side?
Yeah, so we're a 200-person company, and we spent basically 3 months just basically doing the standard consulting, current state, future state definition, and it was scary to see how many of the current state processes were just broken. I mean, we had all of these data enrichment contracts that we were paying for, but we weren't actually using that to make sure that the right rep got the right lead to sell to it in the proper way according to our sales process. And so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. And the good news is that it took us 3 months to do that. It took us a couple of weeks to figure out what we wanted to do, because it's not really that hard. I mean, what what you need to do. And now we're implementing it, and it's happened relatively quickly. But it's amazing how bad things can get very quickly, and how people have this mindset of, well, it's just bad, but that's the way it is. If you actually step back and take a look at it and show what's happening, it becomes very clear to everybody, even the skeptical budgeting authority, that this is a problem that you got to fix.
I actually have a different perspective on this. While I appreciate once you get to the size of Salesforce and you can be in a situation where it's almost too hard to do it at all, I feel like it can't possibly be a real priority until you get to a size that things are so bad that you can't move forward. And maybe it's just because I haven't had the experience where it's been so bad that we've had to re-implement. That's totally possible. But I've not been anywhere where implementing a new instance of Salesforce could possibly take a top 5 priority in what we're working on. So I don't agree. I think that bolt on for as long as you can, and then someday when you got a couple $100 million in revenue and a bigger team to re-implement, go for it. But until then, coming up to the head of sales and saying, I'm your partner, we're going to figure out how to grow, but I actually want to spend all my time re-implementing Salesforce right now, I just don't think it's a credible argument.
Go ahead. I think one of the key things that we see, especially in early stage companies, is you pick the right tools. Don't pick ones that are limiting you, that you know are not going to grow and scale. But then I agree with Ryan. Like, I think that the prioritization of re-implementation of Salesforce is a very difficult conversation to have when there are so many other competing priorities. And I think we frankly overestimate the value of having everything be 100% perfect. If you decide along the way that, hey, we need to change some of these processes and it's going to take me thousands of hours to go back and redo all the data from the last 5 years so that it perfectly matches my current process, you're going to be doing that every single time. Instead, let's say that your board is really only caring about the last 6 months or a year or whatever of data, go back and clean the last 6 months or 18 months of data. You don't have to have the entire thing be perfect. I'm probably going to ruffle some feathers there. I think people have different viewpoints on that one, but be realistic about how much you actually need to be consistent with your policies at every point in time, because that will actually allow you to have flexibility to change things as you need to respond to the needs of the business, and still make sure that your reporting is consistent, over the last year, 2 years, whatever that threshold is that's needed.
I actually really strongly agree. You can't, the amount of time it would take to go back and retroactively update data can be a nightmare. So usually when you make some sort of change to a process that you need to go back and switch fields and data, you want to pick a hard stop, a year end, a quarter end, something like that, to where you can say, prior to this quarter, data looks this way, prior to that quarter, data looks this way, and from a sales ops perspective, you can manage that. I actually went through a scoping of a rip and replace, and I was part of an acquisition. The company came in and said, we're great, we're going to merge our Salesforce instances, and I was like, hold up. Our entire Salesforce instance was architected by a demand gen person back in the way back days. So it was not set up correctly. The accounts and leads were not connected. It was meant to just show that we have all these leads, and so there was duplicate accounts for everything, and it was just a mess. And so we actually scoped out the whole thing to rip and replace, and it was phenomenal to see the cost of doing that, both from a training, from an implementation perspective. It was just going to be very painful. So still to this day, 3 years post-acquisition, they're running 2 separate Salesforce instances because of that. Wow. So because the pain was so great. So just to give you a little bit of an idea there.
Any other questions from the audience? I will almost say. Yeah, go ahead, Dinesh.
This is Dinesh. So I may actually agree with Jim, because I think the fundamental reason to do a re-implementation is that the business processes have fundamentally changed to the point that there's a cost, even on sales ops, to maintain that previous integration and make it run with twine and gum. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and just to be the lone dissenting opinion, I don't really think I disagree with my colleagues here about this. The point that we got to was that it was impacting our ability to generate revenue. And so, the suggestion isn't, oh, well, we need to clean this up to make, the person that I have spending 8 hours a day, doing project X that's a manual effort. That's not the point that we had gotten to. It was legitimately a company revenue generation problem. And so, I'm very much an advocate of, the perfect is the enemy of the good. But when the good gets not good enough, then, you need to recognize that early and you need to take action before, it's easier to do now than it is to do later. No.
So one last question to you, Ryan. Congratulations on your promotion. Say now that you are a sales leader, what would be your advice to someone who's starting off in sales ops for a growing company?
I've had decent sized sales ops teams, and what I've talked to them about the different individuals is sort of which way within sales ops is your passion. Do you want to be closer to the sales leader, to be the person that's right next to him or her, understanding what's in the pipeline, being able to forecast, having your own forecast, which you're double checking and like really understanding the deals, which is kind of how I wanted to be. I was very focused on what was going on, and I naturally gravitated more towards the reps and all of that. Or do you want to be a little bit more on the planning and working with the finance and IT and understanding the infrastructure and driving, like building that backbone for the company? I think both are good ways to go. Best to ask yourself which way it is that you want to go, because that'll help you in terms of where you want your career to go at a certain point. If you do want to move, like if you get to a VP of ops or SVP of ops, and then like, is there a next step? What's the next step? Which way do you go? So I guess my advice would be like, think about what you like most about it and really dig into that side, and then staff somebody who's counter to you. So like I was definitely not on the tech side, like on the stack and everything. I was never my focus. I can think about it and I can think about the strategy, but all of the pain that comes in there was not sort of where I focused my time. But I always had to have people who really were into that, because otherwise it would be a mess, and vice versa. So I don't know, I guess that would be my advice. I don't know if that helps.
Did you have sales, direct individual contributing sales experience before?
I didn't. So I when I was at Mixpanel, we let go of our CRO, and so I was acting CRO for a while. And then when I came to Gainsight after about a year of running RevOps, I made a pitch that I should run the corporate team, which at Gainsight is basically new business under 1,000 employees and account management, as well as ops. And my view was, my pitch was it's a more volume business, it's understanding the data, it's forecasting, and it's obviously talking to customers and getting in front of customers, but a lot of it's like making sure that the machine works. So I did that for a year, and then just recently moved away from ops completely to run our new product line.
And so you weren't doing the actual training and sales process?
We had enablement. So I had enablement under me. So yeah, I mean, I'm very focused on process and all that as well.
Any last questions? Well, thank you for it. Sorry, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to add to Ryan's comment is you'd be amazed as a sales ops leader how much street cred you get if you've actually run sales. So I think if you have the opportunity to do that, it's a great way to really prove that you know what the workflow is, how people are operating within their environment. I did it kicking and screaming for about 6 months. It was very scary. It's a scary world to be in, but at the same time, it made me much better at the operations side of the job once I got back to that full time.
Yeah, I agree. And my background was sales leadership, and I was pushed into sales ops kind of reluctantly originally at first, and then I found that it's something that I am very passionate about. So I think that sales leadership thing is absolutely crucial to be able to relate to your sales leaders. Sometimes they have to trust that you understand what their day-to-day looks like, or you become, I hate the term, but sales stop-orations when you're talking about what you're trying to do. So, yeah, anyway.
I find that a challenge not having direct going into sales ops.
Yeah, it's important that you build trust, and if you can't do it through actual sales leadership, I think the shadowing, like you were talking about, live and breathe sales for a time, and let them see that you understand their pain and what they're actually living and breathing, because it's important, because we make these changes up here to the data or how we expect them to do business, but you don't realize what an impact that can have. Like even some of the, making sure that they can do things on their phones, pieces like that we don't think about because we're just looking at the end result data is really important. So I think to build trust with your sales leadership and to really have them be bringing you in during those go-to-market and those strategic discussions, they have to be able to trust that you understand what they're going through. So.
Yeah, and I would add, like, empathizing with the reps, not just the leaders, like, is super important. I think You made the comment earlier about different processes and what's important and like understanding what's simplified. At Gainsight, when I first started, one of the first things that I did was, after talking to a lot of reps, basically we have new business, which has like 1 million required fields, and then we have add-ons, which is like you sell another seat, but that still had like 1 million fields. And the team, the reps, had been complaining about this for a long time to the legacy ops team. And so the first thing I did was like, just create 2 types and nothing is required on the add-on, basically. And it took me a long time to get the ops team to even prioritize it. I'm like, just do it, is basically what it got to. And when we announced it, there was a standing ovation. And literally the ops team was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is such a big deal. But it was just that empathy helped me when I first started at Gainsight gain credibility with the team that I'm here to work with you.
Well, thank you for your time, and I think hopefully you guys will be around for the rest of the day. And so if anybody has any questions, feel free. I think that'll be great.